The education of our children will suffer here in Mississippi, in Trump's America. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Especially if he goes through with what he plans to do, what he campaigned on, which is to dismantle the Department of Education. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. Before we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I am your homeboy first, and this is the realest, most entertaining show in the game. Put it on some. Again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that share button, put all your people on there. Make sure you put your people on. Make sure you hit those, turn those post notifications on. Do that so you don't miss out on anything, especially this real shit. Okay. Um. Again, Mississippi Clarion Ledger did an article. It said, if Trump gets rid of the U.S. Department of Education, where does that leave Mississippi? As I said previously, the Mississippi Clarion Ledger cannot be misconstrued as a liberal paper. This is not the fake news liberal media. Okay. But I want to read some of this to y'all and offer some commentary to y'all as somebody who has firsthand knowledge of the educational system, somebody who has been an award-winning teacher, an administrative intern, an educational consultant. I've seen it all. I've done it. I know it. Okay. So it says, what would happen in Mississippi if the United States Department of Education is closed? Okay. It reads, many experts have speculated what would happen if the U.S. Department of Education were to close. The specifics are not yet clear, but the effects could range from subtle changes to complete overhauls. The majority of education is already governed on a state level through legislation and policy. Let me repeat that shit for all these fuck boys and bitches out here who act like the U.S. Department of Education is just bearing down on everybody and doing this and doing that. The majority of education is already governed on a state level through legislation and policy. My kids took a state test. The standards that I had to teach from were decided on by the state. Now, when Obama was in office, I think they had the Common Core shit, and that did make things. It increased the rigor. That was the term that consistently was used at the time. The rigor. But that's right. If we want our kids to compete in a global marketplace, don't you think we need to be playing by the same rules? Don't you think we need to have similar standards? You don't want a kid being educated in Mississippi to go to another state, try to get a job, and that kid just feels behind because of where they were educated. You don't want that. See, shit like that, motherfuckers don't want folks in Washington, D.C. telling them anything, Jack. Don't tell me shit. So I know what they come back to. I know what they come back to now. That comes back to them being still pissed about Washington telling them to integrate. But I digress. Public K 12 schools, this is back to the article. Public K 12 schools receive most of their funding through state legislatures and local taxes. A lot of motherfuckers don't understand that's how these schools are funded. A lot of motherfuckers don't understand that when you see disparities in these school districts. We see disparities in these various individual schools. They don't understand how the local tax base plays a part in that. Okay, so let me reiterate that again. Public K 12 schools receive most of their funding through state legislatures and local taxes. We already know our state legislature on some bullshit. They won't fully fund the shit. They came up with a formula and don't fully fund shit based on their own formula. But in some places, it doesn't matter because the local tax base is so good that it makes up for it. But in others, like the Mississippi Delta, where the local tax base is not good enough, those schools flounder. But the article continues. However, the federal government provides vital funding for many of Mississippi's education programs. Now, that is true. The U.S. Department of Education's closure does not necessarily mean the elimination of federal funding. Most likely, existing federal funding within education would redistribute to other federal departments, which would then allot the funding to various states. The majority of those funds are currently allotted to public K 12 schools. Now, if you give those funds to Republicans here in the state of Mississippi, fuck y'all think they're gonna do? Like if you give the funds directly to them to allocate, fuck y'all think they're gonna do with them? You've seen how they mismanage money. You've seen how they just be outright corrupt. Look at the Brett Favre, TANF, welfare scandal, Nancy New, all that shit. We've seen this. We've seen school districts be systematically underfunded. Hell, I'm reading that a book about Fannie Lou Hamer right now, and it's infuriating to read about the disparities and the amount of money that was spent on black schools versus white schools, and then they have to think about, oh, my mama grew up like that. My mama being born in 1947, to have to think that my mama grew up in some shit like that. The fuck you think gonna happen when that money ends up in just state hands without federal oversight? That's what they want to get rid of, the federal oversight. It's what people voted for. This is what people voted for. But the article continues. Mississippi receives a significant amount of federal funding each year for public education. For the 2024-2025 school year, nearly $2 billion of the state's total $5.2 billion public education budget comes from federal funding. That means approximately 36% of Mississippi's public education budget for the current school year comes from federal funding. These motherfuckers always want to say fuck the federal government. Mississippi would probably be a developing nation without the goddamn federal government. Like we were an independent nation. We'd probably be a developing nation. We'd be like one of these goddamn countries in South America or Central America. It wasn't for the federal government. But these folks always on some fuck the feds shit. Fuck the federal government. We want smaller government. Come on, bro. Nancy Loom, director of the Parents Campaign, a Jackson-based nonprofit advocating for the state's public schools, said this significant slice of federal funding would not completely disappear in the event of the U.S. Department of Education's closure. Her quote is, "I don't think we can assume that all of that money will go away," Loom said. "It is entirely possible for the federal government to appropriate funds to public schools and send it through a federal agency." Now, this is the shit that's going to get scary right here, where they basically talk about getting rid of the federal oversight. This is where shit gets real. I want you to make sure you pay attention to this, especially if you have a child who has special needs like I do. My son has autism, okay? Especially if you have a black child in a majority white school and that black child has to go into social studies classes, you need to especially pay attention to this, okay? It says, instead of eliminating federal funding, abolishing the U.S. Department of Education is aimed more toward reducing federal oversight. This reduction would likely mean scaling back federal programming and regulations within education. Special education is one of the main programs regulated by the U.S. Department of Education. This is a quote. The U.S. Department of Education serves a very, very important role in making sure that children with special needs are being served well in their districts. You got a lot of school districts who are fucking scared of these lawsuits because they know that there are federal regulations in place that they have to follow. Imagine if those damn regulations are gone and your child with a disability is being a hindrance, a perceived hindrance to the school, being a headache at the school. Imagine what these motherfuckers do with your baby, man. Imagine that. Even with these regulations, I would argue that a lot of these school districts don't do right by our babies who have special needs. Imagine if there's no federal oversight to try to make them do right. Imagine if there's nothing for them to be afraid of. What would happen? Look at what this advocate says. Most of the laws and regulations governing special education in federal laws and the U.S. Department of Education is tasked with overseeing those things and making sure that those children are served well. Without the U.S. Department of Education, there really is no regulatory body that is assigned that obligation. This is real shit we talking about, man. This motherfucker who I doubt his kids went to public school. I haven't researched that or nothing, but I know Trump doesn't give a fuck about no public school, man. He don't give a fuck about education at all. This man dismantling the Department of Education could lead to your child with special needs, my child with special needs, having a tougher time at school, man. Think about that. It ain't just black people that got kids with special needs. It ain't just liberals. It ain't just Democrats. Yet and still, people heard that man say that shit and just was like, we don't care. That's our guy. Doing a little fucking dance and shit. Come on, man. This is real shit we talking about. Your baby got IEP. Them motherfuckers, you got to stay on them already to try to get them to follow the IEP. Imagine ain't no oversight on that shit. What they'll do. Come on, man. Come on. Not to mention the other shit this article is talking about. The funding for programs like free lunch and the free breakfast that kids get when they're disadvantaged at these schools. Not to mention Title I funds that goes to bring in consultants like I was doing. I've helped kids pass their state test. Kids who may not have had the best instruction coming from their regular ed teacher. I come through that thing and handle my business, and I get them to pass the test. Without Title I funding being administered by the Department of Education, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Now, I would argue, how about You increase the funding for education. You pay teachers 100 grand, and you don't have to bring in people like me, but you retain people like me. Maybe you attract more people like me to be teachers in the first place. And you don't need those consultants. What about the war on truth? What the fuck is going to happen with that without federal oversight? What the fuck is going to happen in these schools, in these states, and in these school districts where they don't want the truth taught? They might not want their children to learn about January 6th. They might not want their children to learn that George Washington was an enslaver, that Thomas Jefferson was an enslaver. They might not want that. They may want their children to learn that there were some benefits to slavery, that they learned job skills, that they were introduced to Christianity. Bullshit. They might want all this without federal oversight. These are the things I need y'all to be aware of. Okay? These are the things I need y'all to be prepared to fight against. Because without you being on your shit as a parent, your child's education may suffer here in Mississippi in Donald Trump's America. Put it on some.